Just give it back! The words ripped from his throat, a sound raw enough to curdle milk. Not a request, an order. Billionaire Alistair Finch, all 6'4" of him, looming over Clara Ara, a waitress barely scraping by. His eyes wild, fixated on the tarnished silver necklace nestled against her collar. He thinks it's his. He thinks it was stolen. He has no idea. The locket isn't just metal and stone. It's a promise whispered in a dying breath, a kindness that will unravel a decade of carefully constructed grief. They think she's just a girl in a dead-end job. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. For a decade, he wandered like a ghost through the corridors of his wealth, a prisoner of memory, his life tethered to a single priceless portrait of his late wife. The world saw power and success, but behind the closed doors of his mansion, silence and sorrow ruled. Then on one stormy Tuesday night, in a restaurant as unremarkable as any other fate intervened. An unexpected encounter with a young woman named Clara would fracture the walls he had built on earth, a secret buried for 10 years, and remind him that sometimes the deepest truths and the greatest salvations appear in the most unlikely of places. Alistair Finch didn't live. He existed at 58. His name was a titan in the world of finance, a synonym for ruthless acquisitions and astronomical wealth. His penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a sterile art gallery with panoramic views of a city he no longer saw. His days were a metronome of calculated decisions, board meetings, and empty accolades. But his nights belonged to Elena. 10 years. It had been 10 years, 3 months, and 12 days since the screech of tires on a rain-slicked road had torn his world from its axis. Elena, his vibrant laughing. Elena was gone. All that remained were the ghosts that walked the silent halls of his memory and the magnificent portrait that hung above the cold marble fireplace in his private study. The portrait was Alistair's sanctuary in his prison. Painted by the celebrated artist Julian Croft a year before her death, it captured her essence with an almost supernatural accuracy. The gentle curve of her smile, the intelligence sparkling in her emerald eyes, the cascade of auburn hair over her shoulder and around her neck, the focal point of Alistair's decade-long obsession, the moon locket. It wasn't ostentatious. It was a simple handcrafted piece of sterling silver, a delicate crescent moon cradling a single tiny sapphire that glittered like a captured star. He had commissioned it from a reclusive artisan in the hills of Tuscany for their first wedding anniversary. It was one of a kind. The artist, a man named Alejandro Bellini, had passed away months after creating it. Elena had adored it. She said it was like he had hung the moon and a star around her neck just for her. She was wearing it the night of the accident. The police report was clinical. The vehicle was totaled, the wreckage catastrophic. The locket was never recovered, lost to the chaos, presumed melted in the fire, or stolen by a faceless scavenger in the immediate aftermath. For Alistair, its loss was a second agonizing death. It was the last piece of her he couldn't protect, the final tangible link that had vanished into the ether. His one ritual, the only deviation from his rigid schedule, was his weekly dinner at the Gilded Sparrow. It was the last restaurant he and Elena had dined at together. Every Tuesday, he would sit at the same corner table, order the same pan-seared scallops she had loved, and drink a glass of the same sare, staring at the empty chair across from him. It was a pilgrimage of pain, a self-flagellation, he felt. He deserved. On this particular Tuesday, the city wept with a cold, persistent rain, mirroring the perpetual winter in Alistair's soul. His chauffeur, Marcus, a stoic man who had been with him for 20 years, pulled the Rolls-Royce Phantom to the curb. "We're here, Mr. Finch." Alistair didn't reply. He simply stepped out, letting the doorman's umbrella shield him from a reality he barely registered, and walked into the warm, amber glow of the Gilded Sparrow, preparing for another evening with his ghost. Meanwhile, in the bustling staff corridor of the restaurant, Clara Ara Mabe was retying the apron around her slender waist. At 24, life was a constant, precarious, balancing act. By day, she was a promising, if perpetually broke, art history student at Hunter College. By night, she was a waitress, her grace and quiet efficiency making her a favorite among the demanding clientele, though she herself was invisible to them. Her world was a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens, shared with her 17-year-old brother Leo, whom she was putting through high school. Their parents were long gone. Their father was a ghost she never knew, and their mother, Sarah, had succumbed to a swift and cruel illness 4 years prior. Around Clara Ara's neck, tucked beneath the collar of her uniform, lay her only connection to the mother she missed with a fierce, aching love. It was a beautiful, unique silver necklace, a crescent moon with a tiny sapphire star. Her mother had given it to her on her 18th birthday. "This is a reminder, my love," Sarah had whispered, her voice, weak but full of warmth, "that even in the darkest night, there is always a little bit of light and beauty. Never forget that Clara Ara never knew where her mother, a humble but dedicated nurse, had gotten such a special piece of jewelry. When she asked, Sarah would just smile sadly and say, 'It was a gift from a soul I met on a very dark night.' Clara Ara cherished it, a talisman against the weariness of her life. Tonight, the floor manager, the perpetually stressed Mr. Dubois, assigned her the corner booth. "Table 7 is yours, Clara Ara. It's Mr. Finch. You know the drill. Be quick. Be quiet. Don't make small talk. He's particular." Clara Ara nodded, her expression neutral. She knew of Mr. Finch, the silent, sad man who came every week and stared at nothing. She felt a strange pang of sympathy for him. He looked like a man who had the whole world but had lost his map. Straightening her spine, she picked up a water carafe and a menu and walked towards table 7, completely unaware that she was about to step into the epicenter of a decade-old storm. Alistair sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the flickering candle in the center of the table. The flame danced, but his eyes were still seeing not the light, but the darkness it held at bay. The restaurant's muted symphony, the clink of silverware on porcelain, the low hum of conversation, the distant melody of a piano, was a wall of sound he had long since learned to ignore. He was in his bubble of grief, a space so familiar it was almost comfortable. Clara approached the table with the quiet confidence of a seasoned professional. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice soft and unobtrusive. "May I pour you some water?" Alistair gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, not lifting his eyes from the candle. As she leaned forward, the delicate silver chain around her neck slipped from beneath her collar. The pendant, a crescent moon holding a sapphire star, swung gently forward, catching the candlelight. For a moment it glittered in Alistair's peripheral vision, a flicker of intrusive light. He instinctively glanced up, annoyed at the distraction, and then time stopped. His brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. It was impossible. A trick of the light, a phantom of his grief adult mind. He blinked hard, expecting it to vanish, but it remained hanging in the space between them, impossibly real. The elegant curve of the silver moon, the precise deep blue of the sapphire, the unique hand-wrought texture he had traced with his thumb 1,000 times. It was the moon locket. A sound escaped his lips, a choked, guttural gasp that was louder than any word he had spoken in years. His carefully constructed dam of composure, fortified over a decade of disciplined mourning, didn't just crack, it exploded. Clara Ara froze, the water carafe hovering over his glass. His eyes, which had been dull and lifeless moments before, were now wide with a terrifying raw intensity. They were locked on the necklace. "Where?" he stammered, his voice a ragged whisper that tore through the restaurant's gentle ambiance. His hand, a hand that signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, began to shake violently. He reached out not to touch, but as if drawn by an invisible force. "Where did you get that?" Clara Ara instinctively took a step back, her heart pounding against her ribs. She clutched the locket protectively. "I am sorry, sir." "The necklace?" he breathed, his face contorting with a decade of unshed tears. The grief he had held in with such iron control was now a tidal wave, and he was drowning in it. His eyes filled, and the first tear traced a path down his stone-like face. Then another, and another. The Titan of Wall Street, the unshakable Alistair Finch, was crumbling before her very eyes. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the polished floor. He tried to stand but stumbled, his body overwhelmed by the seismic shock to his soul. Eleanor, he whispered the name, a sacred broken prayer. By now the surrounding tables had fallen silent. Diners stared, their forks paused midair. Mr. Dubois, seeing the commotion, came rushing over his face, a mask of panicked professionalism. "Mr. Finch, is everything all right? Clara Ara, what did you do?" he hissed at her, assuming his waitress was somehow at fault. But Alistair didn't hear him. He saw only the locket, a relic from a buried life, a ghost made manifest in silver and sapphire. He collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands, and began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but wrenching, soul-sing sobs that echoed the violent tearing of old wounds. It was the sound of 10 years of silence breaking all at once. Clara Ara stood rooted to the spot, a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and a bewildering sense of pity swirling within her. This powerful, intimidating man was weeping like a lost child because of her mother's necklace. The restaurant, the staring faces, Mr. Dubois' frantic apologies, it all faded into a blur. Her reality had suddenly tilted, and at its center was a grieving billionaire and the simple silver moon she wore around her neck. The scene dissolved into a controlled chaos. Marcus Alistair's chauffeur, who had been waiting in the lobby, appeared at the table in an instant, his presence large and calming. With a quiet authority that borked no argument, he and Mr. Dubois helped a still sobbing Alistair to his feet. "My sincerest apologies for the disturbance," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble, addressing no one and everyone at once. As he guided his distraught employer towards the exit, Alistair stopped. He turned back, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate, finding Clara Ara in the throng of onlookers. I must speak with you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, pulling out a heavy cream-cold business card. He pressed it into her trembling hand, his fingers cold as ice. "Please call this number. Ask for me directly. It is of the utmost importance." And then he was gone, swept out into the rainy night, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence and a restaurant full of whispered speculation. Clara Ara stared down at the card in her hand. Alistair Finch, CEO, Finch Global Holdings. The embossed letters felt heavy, like a summons. Mr. Dubois immediately snatched it from her. "What is the meaning of this, Maeve?" he demanded, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and fear. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing. I did nothing," Clara Ara defended herself, her voice shaking. He saw my necklace, and he broke down." Dubois scoffed, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. "A necklace. Don't be ridiculous. You are on thin ice. Go to the back. I'll deal with you later." He pocketed the card and stormed off to pate his other wealthy patrons. Humiliation washed over Clara Ara as she retreated to the staff room. Her colleagues shot her curious, pitying glances. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. She spent the rest of her shift in a daze mechanically clearing plates and refilling glasses, her mind replaying the bizarre, traumatic event over and over. The image of Alistair Finch's face, a mask of pure agony, was seared into her memory. Later that night, as she rode the subway back to Queens, the train's rhythmic clatter was a counterpoint to the chaotic drumming of her thoughts. The silver locket felt strangely heavy against her skin, a gift from a soul I met on a very dark night. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, now imbued with a new mysterious significance. When she got home, Leo was asleep on the couch, his history textbook open on his chest. She gently draped a blanket over him and went to her small room. From a worn wooden box, she took out a handful of faded photographs of her mother. Sarah Maeve was a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, a pillar of quiet strength who had worked double shifts as an ER nurse to give her children a decent life. There were no pictures of her wearing the locket. Clara Ara realized she'd only ever seen it in its velvet box until her 18th birthday. Her mother had been a private person, especially about her life before the children. She rarely spoke of the past, always focusing on the future. Could this necklace be a key to that hidden past? The next day at the restaurant was tense. Mr. Dubois treated her with cold disdain. She was sure she was about to be fired, but just as the lunch rush began, a sleek black car, the same Rolls-Royce from the night before, pulled up outside. Marcus, the chauffeur, entered the restaurant. He ignored the finning Mr. Dubois and walked directly to Clara. "Miss Maeve," he said politely, "Mr. Finch has requested your presence. He has asked that I bring you to his home." He then turned to Dubois. "And Mr. Finch also requests that you return the card you took from Miss Maeve and that she be compensated for her full day's work, as she will be leaving with me now." Mr. Dubois turned pale. He stammered an apology and quickly handed the card back to Clara. The power dynamics had shifted entirely. No longer a troublesome waitress, she was now an invited guest of the most powerful man in the room. Clara was terrified. What did he want? Was she in some kind of trouble? But a deeper, more compelling force, curiosity, pushed her forward. This was bigger than her job, bigger than a strange incident in a restaurant. This was a thread connected to her mother, and she had to pull on it. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll go." She took off her apron for what felt like the last time and followed Marcus out into the waiting car. As the plush leather door closed with a soft thud, sealing her off from the familiar world of her struggles, she clutched the silver moon locket. She was heading into the heart of a mystery, and she had a frightening feeling that her life was about to change forever. The drive to Alistair Finch's residence was a silent journey through a different reality. The rain had passed, and the city glinted under a weak afternoon sun. But inside the car, the atmosphere was hushed and solemn. They traveled uptown, leaving the gritty energy of Midtown for the hallowed old money canyons of the Upper East Side. The Rolls-Royce pulled into a private gated driveway before a limestone mansion that looked less like a home and more like a national monument. Marcus led her through an impossibly grand entrance hall. The floors were polished marble, the ceilings soared 3 stories high, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps. It was a palace devoid of life, a gilded cage built for one. He showed her into a vast drawing room. The furniture was exquisite, priceless, yet it all seemed untouched, like a museum exhibit. Alistair Finch was standing by a towering window, his back to her, looking out over a manicured garden. He looked different from the broken man in the restaurant. Today he was composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, but his shoulders were slumped with an invisible weight. He turned as she entered. His eyes, though no longer wild with grief, held a deep, profound sadness. "Miss Maeve," he said, his voice quiet and formal, "thank you for coming. Please accept my deepest apologies for my behavior last night. It was inexcusable." "It's all right," Clara said softly, though it wasn't. "Are you okay?" A flicker of something surprised, perhaps, that she would ask crossed his face. "I will be. Please, there is something I must show you, the reason for my outburst. It is the only way you will understand." He led her out of the drawing room and down a long, paneled hallway. He stopped before a set of imposing oak doors and pushed them open, revealing a study. The room was lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. A large mahogany desk sat at one end, but the room was dominated by what hung over the massive unlit fireplace. The portrait. Clara gasped. It was a masterpiece, a woman of breathtaking beauty captured in a moment of serene happiness. She wore an emerald green dress that complemented her fiery auburn hair and sparkling green eyes. She looked alive, as if she could step out of the frame at any moment. And as Clara's eyes, trained by her art history studies, took in the details, the masterful brush strokes, the play of light and shadow, they landed on the woman's neck. Her heart stopped. There, rendered in perfect luminous detail by the artist's brush, was her locket, the crescent moon, the sapphire star. It was identical in every conceivable way. "That's," she whispered, her voice trailing off as she took a step closer. "That's impossible." "Her name was Elenina," Alistair said, his voice thick with unshed tears as he stared at the painting. "She was my wife," he began to speak, and the story of the locket poured out of him. He told her about the reclusive Tuscan artisan, Alejandro Bellini, and how he had commissioned the one-of-a-kind piece for their first anniversary. He described how Elenina had never taken it off, how it had become a part of her. "She was wearing it on the night of the accident," he said, his voice breaking. She was driving back from visiting her sister upstate. The roads were slick from a storm. The police report said the car hit a patch of black ice. His gaze was fixed on the necklace in the painting. They searched the wreckage for days. I hired my own team to sift through every piece of debris. It was gone. I assumed it had been destroyed or stolen. For 10 years, I have believed it was lost forever. He finally turned his gaze from the portrait to look at Clara, his eyes pleading. And then last night, I saw you wearing her locket, wearing a piece of my wife's soul. So I must ask you again, Miss Maeve. Please tell me how it came to be in your possession. Clara was speechless, her mind reeling. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She looked from the painted locket to the real one she clutched in her hand. They were not similar. They were the same. Taking a deep breath, she found her voice. This was my mother's. She said her words, feeling small and inadequate in the cavernous room. Her name was Sarah Maeve. She was a nurse. She gave it to me for my 18th birthday just before she passed away. She told me it was a gift given to her on a very dark night. Alistair's brow furrowed. Sarah Maeve, a nurse. The name means nothing to me. Did she know my wife? Were they friends? I don't think so, Clara said honestly. My mom never mentioned anyone named Elena. We didn't move in circles like this. The understatement hung in the air between them. A tense chillance filled the room. The beautiful woman in the portrait smiled down on them, her painted eyes holding a secret that connected these two desperate worlds. Alistair saw the ghost of his wife, and Clara saw the mystery of her mother. I will give you anything for it, Alistair said, his voice laced with desperation. Name your price. $1 million, $5 million. It is a meaningless sum to me. I need it back. Clara looked at the locket in her hand, then back at the portrait. $5 million would change her and Leo's lives forever. No more debt, no more double shifts. A real future. But then she thought of her mother's hand, cool and frail, pressing this into her palm. Even in the darkest night, there is always a little bit of light and beauty. It was the last piece of her mother she had left. I'm sorry, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I can't sell it. It's not about the money. It's all I have left of her. Alistair looked devastated, but a flicker of respect showed in his eyes. He saw in her a conviction that money couldn't buy. He nodded slowly. I understand, but I cannot let this go. There is a story here, a piece of my wife's final hours that I never knew, and I will find out what it is. Alistair Finch was a man who bent the world to his will through resources and relentless determination. The mystery of the locket was no different. The day after his meeting with Clara, he summoned the best private investigator in New York City, a woman whose discretion and tenacity were legendary, Miss Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm competence that immediately put Alistair at ease. She sat opposite him in his sterile office, a leather-bound notebook in her lap, and listened without interruption as he recounted the entire story. The accident, the lost locket, the waitress and her mother, the nurse named Sarah Maeve. So the objective is twofold, Alistair concluded, his hands clasped on his mahogany desk. First, I want you to trace the provenance of that locket. I want to know with absolute certainty how it went from the scene of a fatal car accident 10 years ago into the hands of a nurse named Sarah Maeve. Second, I want a complete history of Sarah Maeve. I want to know who she was, where she worked, and if there was any possible connection, no matter how remote, to my wife, Elena Finch. I'll need the exact date and location of the accident, the police report, and any personal effects that were recovered from the scene, Evelyn said, her pen gliding across the page. I'll also need everything you have on Elena's schedule for that day. It's all here, Alistair said, pushing a thick file across the desk. 10 years of dead ends. I hope you have better luck. I don't rely on luck, Mr. Finch, Evelyn stated plainly. Evelyn Reed's investigation began not with people, but with paper. She sequestered herself in a private office surrounded by documents. The police report on Elena's accident was thorough, but clinical. Single vehicle collision. Route 17 westbound near the town of Montoello. Black ice cited as a contributing factor. Victim pronounced deceased at the scene. Evelyn noted the timestamp 11:48 p.m., October 26th. Next, she pulled the property log from the case file, a list of Elena's recovered belongings, a designer handbag, a wallet containing credit cards, and $200 in cash, a pair of diamond earrings. No mention of a necklace. The paramedics' report was the same. The locket had simply vanished. Then Evelyn shifted her focus to Sarah Maeve. She ran a background check. Born in Binghamton, New York, graduated from a state nursing program. No criminal record, a string of addresses in working-class neighborhoods in Queens, a single mother to two children, Clara Ara and Leo. The father was not listed on their birth certificates. For all intents and purposes, Sarah Maeve was an ordinary woman who had lived an ordinary, hard-working life. Evelyn started cross-referencing. She pulled employment records. 10 years ago, Sarah Maeve was employed as an ER nurse. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She checked the location. Sarah didn't work at a major New York City hospital. She worked at a small regional medical center, Catskill Regional. Evelyn felt a jolt, the first real spark of connection. She pulled up a map. Catskill Regional Medical Center was less than 15 miles from the crash site on Route 17. This changed everything. The police report stated Elena was pronounced dead at the scene. But was that entirely accurate? In the chaos of a bad accident on a dark night, initial reports could be wrong. What if she had been transported? Evelyn made a call, pulling a favor with a contact at the state archives. She wanted the ambulance dispatch logs and the emergency room admission records for Catskill Regional for the night of October the 26th, 10 years ago. It was a long shot. Records that old might be lost or deep in storage. While she waited, she delved into Elena Finch's life. A listister had given her access to Elena's old emails and calendars. She was a prolific philanthropist involved in dozens of charities. But Evelyn wasn't looking for her public life. She was looking for secrets. She started reading the personal emails, the ones exchanged with family. There were frequent warm emails with her parents. But then Evelyn found something odd, a gap. Elena had a younger sister, Isabel Darrow, from whom she was apparently estranged. There were no emails to or from Isabel, but her name appeared in tense exchanges between Elena and her mother. "Mother, you must understand Isabel made her choice, but she is still my sister." It was a potential lead, but it seemed unrelated to the locket. Evelyn filed it away and focused on the more promising thread, the hospital. 2 days later, a digitized file arrived in her inbox, the ER logs from Catskill Regional. She scrolled through the admissions for the night of the accident, a broken arm from a fall, a child with a high fever. Then she saw it, an admission time-stamped den. Jane Doe, unresponsive female, approximately 40 years old, admitted from a single-vehicle MVC on Route 17. Severe trauma. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. The police report was wrong. Elena Finch hadn't died on the roadside. She had died in the hospital. She quickly scanned the staff roster for the ER shift that night. Her eyes moved down the list of doctors and nurses on duty. And there it was. Nurse on duty, triage and trauma bay, to Sarah Maeve RN. The thread was no longer just a thread. It was a rope connecting the billionaire's wife and the waitress's mother in the final desperate moments of Elena Finch's life. Sarah hadn't just randomly found the locket. She had been there. The discovery that Elena had died in the hospital and not on the roadside hit a listister like a physical blow. For a decade, he had pictured a sudden, merciful end. The new reality that she had been alive, alone, and in a stranger's hospital was a fresh hell, but it also provided the context Evelyn Reed needed. She was brought in as a Jane Doe, Evelyn explained, sitting opposite Alistair in his study, the portrait of Elena looking down at them. Your wife's ID was in her handbag. But in the chaos of a trauma case, the first priority is stabilization, not identification. By the time they found it and made the call, you were already on your way. But she had already passed. That window from her arrival to her death was approximately 50 minutes. Sarah Maeve was the primate Murray Priory nurse signed to her bay. "So she stole it," Alistair said, his voice flat and cold. My wife was dying, and that woman stole her necklace. I don't think it's that simple, Mr. Finch, Evelyn countered gently. Sarah Maeve had a spotless record. No complaints, no disciplinary actions. She was known for her compassion. Stealing from a dying patient seems out of character. There's another piece to this puzzle. Evelyn gestured to the file on Elena's arranged sister, Isabel. I started digging into Isabel Devo. It wasn't easy. It seems the Devo family, Elena's family, effectively disowned her. She fell in love with a man they disapproved of, a musician with no money. They cut her off. She disappeared from their world about 15 years before Elena's death. Evelyn had tracked Isabel down. It took weeks, but she found her living a quiet, impoverished life in a small town near Ithaca. She was now a widow named Isabel Jensen. According to her calendar, Evelyn continued, Eleanor had found Isabel 2 months before the accident. They had been secretly communicating, trying to heal the rift. The night of the accident, Elena wasn't just visiting her sister. She was driving to meet Isabel for the first time in 15 years. She was bringing a cashier's check for a significant amount of money to help Isabel get back on her feet, and she was bringing her a personal gift to signify their reconciliation. Alistair stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The locket precisely, Evelyn confirmed. The only person who knew the plan was Elena's personal assistant at the time. I spoke with her. Elena was ecstatic, but also nervous. She hadn't seen her sister since Isabel was a teenager. She was worried she wouldn't even recognize her. Now Evelyn painted the final tragic picture for Alistair. Imagine the scene, Mr. Finch. Trauma Bay, too. The lights are bright. People are shouting. There's a sense of desperate urgency. Your wife is fading. She's confused, in pain. She knows she's not going to make it. Her one final driving thought is her mission to get help to the sister she just found. In her disoriented state, she sees a kind face leaning over her, a nurse with gentle hands and a soft voice. In the fog of trauma, she doesn't see a stranger. She sees the ghost of the sister. She was so desperate to find a woman around the same age with a compassionate demeanor. Evelyn paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The patient, Jane Doe, was agitated. Evelyn read from a statement she'd managed to get from another nurse on that shift. She kept trying to say something. She was too weak, but she grabbed Nurse Maeve's hand. It was the last thing she did. My wife, Alistair whispered, his voice cracking, thought Sarah Maeve was her sister. It's the only theory that fits all the facts, Evelyn concluded. In her final moments of life, Elena Finch took off the moon locket, the gift intended for her long-lost sister, and pressed it into the hand of the woman she believed to be Isabel. She likely whispered a word and name, I for you. And then she was gone. Sarah Maeve was left holding a priceless piece of jewelry from a patient who had just died. By the time the family arrived, the situation had changed. How could she explain it that the dying patient gave her the necklace? She would have been accused of theft, lost her job, her nursing license. She was a single mother with 2 kids. She panicked, so she said nothing. And she kept the locket not as a stolen treasure, but as a memento of a tragic encounter that haunted her for the rest of her life. The silence in the study was profound. The truth was more complex and more heartbreaking than theft. It was a story not of greed, but of mistaken identity, desperation, and fear. Alistair looked up at the portrait of his wife, and for the first time in 10 years, he saw not just his loss, but her final act. An act of love for a sister he barely knew existed, an act that had failed in its mission, but had been witnessed by a kind stranger. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was Eleanor's last will and testament delivered to the wrong person. The truth, when it finally arrived, was not a cleansing fire, but a quiet, illuminating dawn. For days after his meeting with Evelyn Reed, Alistair Finch did not leave his study. He sat in the deep leather chair opposite the fireplace, simply looking at the portrait of his wife. Before he had looked at it with the possessive anguish of a man robbed of his past. Now he saw it with new eyes. He saw the woman, not just the wife. He saw the sister, the daughter, the secret keeper. The grief was still there, a vast and permanent ocean within him, but its character had changed. The violent crashing waves of raw loss had receded, leaving behind a deep melancholic tide of understanding. He finally saw the subtle tension in her painted smile, the flicker of a worry she had never shared with him. She had been on a mission of love and reconciliation, a mission he never knew about. Her final moments were not just a chaotic end, but a purposeful, if tragic, act. This knowledge didn't lessen the pain, but it gave it shape and meaning. He was no longer just mourning a victim of a senseless accident. He was now the steward of his wife's final unfulfilled wish. And the first step in honoring that legacy was to speak with Clara Maeve. He resisted the instinct to summon her to have Marcus bring her to his world of marble and silence. That was the old Alistair, the man who commanded. This new fragile self understood that he needed to meet her on her own ground. It was an act of contrition for his initial desperation and a gesture of profound respect for the woman whose mother had been an unwitting participant in his life's greatest tragedy. The cafe he chose in Queens was a world away from the Gilded Sparrow. It was small and bustling, filled with the aroma of roasting coffee beans and baking bread. The murmur of neighborhood chatter was a living thing, a stark contrast to the reverential silence of his own home. He felt conspicuous in his tailored suit, a ghost from another world, and sat at a wobbly table by the window, his heart hammering with an anxiety he hadn't felt in years. When Clara arrived, she looked younger and more vulnerable than he remembered. She wore a simple blue sweater, and her hand reflexively went to her neck, covering the locket as she approached his table. The initial silence between them was thick with a decade of secrets. "Thank you for meeting me, Clara." He began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You said you had answers," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes searching his for a hint of what was to come. He took a deep breath, the scent of espresso and steamed milk, feeling alien and grounding all at once. He started to speak not as a billionaire dictating facts, but as a fellow mourner sharing a painful story. He told her everything, his words careful and deliberate. He spoke of Elena's estranged sister, Isabel, of the years of silence and the tentative, secret reunion. He described the cashier's check, the planned meeting, and the one-of-a-kind locket chosen as the ultimate symbol of forgiveness and sisterly love. Clara listened, her expression shifting from confusion to wide-eyed disbelief. Then as Alistair began to describe the scene at Catskill Regional Hospital, the chaotic ER, the Jane Doe admission, the 50-minute window of fading life, her face crumpled. He painted the picture Evelyn Reed had given him, a dying, disoriented Elena, seeing not a nurse in Sarah Maeve, but the face of the sister she was so desperate to reach. In her final moment, Alistair said, his own voice thick with emotion, "My wife believed she had found her sister. She pressed the locket into your mother's hand and let go." A sob escaped Clara's lips, a roar, wounded sound. It all made sense now. The sadness in her mother's eyes, the story of a gift from a soul on a dark night. It wasn't a gift. It was a burden, a terrible sacred secret her mother had carried alone for years. She pictured her strong, stoic mother, a single woman struggling to raise two children, terrified of being accused of theft, of losing everything, yet unable to discard the final wish of a dying stranger. The locket was no longer just a piece of her mother's history. It was the key to her mother's hidden pain. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto the worn wooden table. "She was always so sad when I asked about it," Clara whispered through her tears. "I remember one time I was looking at it in its box, and I saw her reflection in the mirror. She looked so haunted. I thought it was because it reminded her of a lost love. But it was this. She was carrying this all by herself." Alistair pushed the flimsy box of napkins towards her, an awkward but deeply human gesture. "She was a good person, Clara. She was put in an impossible position. In my anger and grief, my first instinct was to believe she was a thief. But the truth is, your mother was a witness to an act of love. She was its unintended guardian. For that I am not angry. I am profoundly grateful she was with Elena when I couldn't be." In that small, noisy cafe over lukewarm coffee, the chasm between them vanished. They were no longer the billionaire and the waitress. They were two orphans of a shared tragedy, their lives forever entwined by a small silver moon, a silent nurse, and a woman in a portrait. The journey upstate a few weeks later was quiet and contemplative. Clara Ara sat in the plush passenger seat of the Rolls-Royce, watching the concrete towers of the city give way to the sprawling green of the countryside. She and Alice Deister spoke intermittently, sharing small, tentative details of the women they had lost. Alice Deister described Elena's laugh, a sound that could fill any room, and Clara spoke of her mother's hands, how they were always gentle, even when chapped and raw from hospital disinfectant. They were building a bridge across their grief, one memory at a time. Isabel Jensen lived in a small, weathered farmhouse, set back from the road, surrounded by a riot of wildflowers. When she opened the door, it was like seeing a ghost. She had the same emerald eyes as the woman in the portrait, but they were etched with the lines of a harder life. There was a weariness about her, the defensiveness of someone long accustomed to being on the outside. Alistair, with a gentleness that surprised Clara, introduced them both and began to retell the story. Isabel listened, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face a mask of disbelief. But as Alice Deister spoke of the secret emails of Elena's excitement and nervousness about their meeting, Isabel's composure began to crack. He was reciting details he couldn't possibly know unless the story was true. When he finally recounted the final moments in the ER, Isabel sank into a nearby chair, her face in her hands, and wept for the sister she had lost twice. After a long while, Clara knew it was time. Her fingers, trembling slightly, went to the clasp at the back of her neck. She unhooked the chain, and the moon locket fell into her palm, feeling both heavy and light. She walked over to Isabel and knelt before her. "This was always meant for you," she said, her voice clear and resonant in the quiet room. She held out her hand, the locket resting on her palm, the tiny sapphire twinkling like a tear. Isabel looked up, her vision blurred. She stared at the locket as if it were a holy relic. With a shaking hand, she reached out and touched it. It was the piece of jewelry Elena had described in her last email, a promise of a new beginning. A sob tore from her throat as she took it, clutching it to her chest. It was a message of love that had taken a decade-long detour through a stranger's life to finally reach her. She held it for a long, sacred moment. Then her tear-filled eyes met Clara's. She looked at this young woman, a person whose life had been shaped by the secret her mother had kept for the sister she now mourned. "My sister gave this to your mother," Isabel said, her voice raspy with emotion, "and your mother, out of fear or compassion, or both, protected it. She passed it to you, her daughter. It left my family's story the moment Eleanor put it in your mother's hand. It became part of your family story. It now represents my sister's love, your mother's compassion, and your integrity in bringing it here." Isabel took Clara's hand and gently folded her fingers back over the cool silver. "Its journey is complete, but its home is with you now. It connects us, all of us. Your mother is part of this story now, just as much as my sister is. Please wear it. Wear it for all of them." In that moment, a circle of grief, secrecy, and loss finally closed, not with an exchange, but with a profound and shared understanding. The aftermath was not an ending, but a new beginning. Alice Deister Finch, a man once defined by acquisitions, now dedicated himself to giving back. The Finch Mave Foundation became his life's work. At the inaugural charity gala, standing before a crowd of New York's elite, he was a different man. The cold, ruthless titan was gone, replaced by a man speaking with raw, heartfelt honesty about loss, overlooked kindness, and second chances. The foundation's logo, designed by Clara, was a subtle silver crescent moon cradling two sapphire stars, one for Elena, one for Sarah. Clara, no longer a waitress, accepted a full-time position as the foundation's creative director. The salary and security allowed her to move with Leo into a sun-filled apartment, one with a spare room. She finally turned into an art studio. She was free, not just from financial worry, but from the weight of an unknown history. She could now paint with a vibrancy and purpose that had eluded her for years, her work imbued with the complex emotions of her extraordinary story. The three of them, Alice Deister, Clara, and Isabel, formed an unlikely, unconventional family. They met for holidays and quiet dinners, three solitary islands bridged by a shared history. A listister learned to smile again, real smiles that reached his eyes. Isabel, finally at peace, began to share stories of a childhood that a listister had never known. And Clara, the quiet center of their new world, would wear the moon locket, its silver cool against her skin. It was no longer a mystery or a burden, but a testament to a sister's love, a mother's compassion, and the incredible invisible threads that can connect desperate souls across the darkest of nights. The story of Alistister, Clara, and Elena is a powerful reminder that we are all connected in ways we can't even imagine. A simple object, a chance encounter, a decade-old secret. These threads weave together the fabric of our lives, proving that beneath the surface of wealth, poverty, and circumstance, we are all just people searching for connection and healing. The moon locket was more than just silver and sapphire. It became a bridge between the past and the present, between grief and forgiveness. It teaches us that the greatest treasures are not the ones we can buy, but the stories of love and compassion that we inherit and pass on. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more real-life stories that explore the hidden dramas and profound connections that shape our world. Thank you for listening.